Ja, da kan dere introdusere dere på engelsk. Herifra og ut det engelsk. So I give the floor to you. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Sara Bell. I'm a representative of the Norwegian Union of Municipal and General Employees, also known as Fagforbundet, in short, Norwegian. And I had the pleasure of being, for 9.5 years, to be an ambassador of the Solidarity Corporation that my trade union and Norwegian people said have in Lebanon and in Gaza and the West Bank. So, and I have had the pleasure to visit the office in Gaza that is now unfortunately bombed. So it's a great pleasure to be able to moderate you. I've spent all day trying to think out really clever questions, but I've just decided to keep with the theme and try to have low shoulders and try and find some common ground in the different ways we work with the questions at hand. So I'll give the word to you, Kyle.
Perfect. Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Gehman. I'm the program coordinator for NPA Palestine, currently working out of our Amman Regional Support Office in Jordan, but supporting our partners and programs across both Gaza and the West Bank. I've been working with NPA Palestine for about a year now, working closely on all of our different projects, and yeah, very happy and honored to be joining you here today and talking about the great work that us, our colleagues, our partners do during these really difficult times, and yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Terje Einarsen. I'm a professor of law at the law faculty here at the University of Bergen. I'm working within international law mainly, including international criminal law. I'm also the chairperson of ICDA Norway. ICDA means, in this respect, International Commission of Jurists. The Norwegian section, which is part of the International Commission, has a main seat in Geneva, and it's actually the oldest international human rights organization, but not the most well-known, I think, among ordinary people, probably because you have to be a lawyer to be a member, and then it's in a way, yeah, it's. But it's an important organization. It does important contributions, have done to the international field. And here in Norway, the ICDA Norway is working on many different subjects, actually. But we have also taken an interest in the situation in Palestine for a number of years. And yeah, we have done some work there also since 7th of October, as maybe we can come back to. Yeah.
Great.
And good evening, everyone. My name is Kelly Flynn. I am the country director for NPA in Palestine, but also the NPA representative in Jordan, where Kyle and I sit in a support coordination office for Palestine, an office that was set up in response to our situation not being able to work out of Gaza. And it's really nice to be with you. This is an urgent time and conversation, and I'm going to speak quite directly and frankly in this discussion, if hopefully with your permission, but also your emotional capacity to listen to some of the things that Kyle and I will probably be sharing on the nature of the questions. But it's very nice to be here. I've had the chance to do some online discussions since October last year, but it's exceptionally good to be here in person and to acknowledge the movement and the solidarity that comes from Bergen around Palestine, and also across the different departments and volunteers involved or members with NPA. So thank you very much. Good to be here.
Thank you. I'd like to, yes, please give him a warm hand. I'd like to start asking Kelly and Kyle what are the practical challenges on the ground in Gaza, in East Jerusalem, and in the West Bank in terms of organizing the work of human rights defenders right now?
Maybe if I could start with that question, which is quite a broad one. Maybe what my main reply to that now is the safety and security of individuals or organizations that express the full rights of Palestinians is probably the most urgent situation we see on the ground. Of course, in Gaza, it's about daily survival in a very active, hostile conflict environment. And I use these words intentionally because there is no discrimination right now between parties to the conflict and innocent civilians, which includes women, boys, men, and girls. So that is probably the most urgent. In terms of human rights, we know that access to humanitarian assistance and protection is a right of civilians in conflict. And this is not being achieved, nor is it being upheld in Gaza, quite frankly. In terms of the West Bank, we are seeing the targeting of Palestinian communities and individuals, and probably at some degree organizations that represent the rights of people to live with their basic spectrum of human rights. And this is now, we're seeing a massive increase of deterioration of the security situation in the West Bank. So, and hopefully we will speak a bit more about this. More specifically for our partners and our staff, it's day-to-day duty of care and respect for their security and safety in both Gaza and across the West Bank. And maybe I'll stop there.
Okay, would you like to add anything to?
Yeah, I mean, to kind of go off what Kelly's already mentioning, I guess more on the operational side for us to be able to do the humanitarian work that we look to do. The difficulty is the unpredictability of what we're able to do. In the first 3 weeks of August alone, there were 16 different evacuation orders in the Gaza Strip that forcibly displaced people, and along with people, forcibly displaced the work that us and our partners and other international organizations, humanitarian organizations do. And so some of the difficulty is just actually being able to plan the support that we know that we need to give, and that meeting the needs that are there. So I think that's quite a difficult issue, as well as I'm sure Kelly and I will talk more about throughout tonight, is also the high level of trauma that the people that are actually doing the work themselves are suffering, because this is not also something that started at October 7th. We have colleagues ourselves who have multi-generational trauma themselves that they're trying to work through every day to be able to support their fellow Palestinians, to support their neighbors, to support their family members. And so for us, it's also about acknowledging the fact that people that are working in the Gaza Strip now are themselves targeted and themselves being displaced, working from areas of displacement, not being able to access basic services themselves. And so that's something I think also that we have to kind of acknowledge, that the people, the humanitarians actually doing the support are themselves in need of that support.
Yes. I think it's interesting you say, you point out that the human rights situation didn't start on the 7th of October, and that sort of maybe leads me over to the international laws expert, because after October, I think there has been, popular demands by demonstrations in streets all over the world demanding that states follow international law, follow their obligations in terms of how to treat their relationship to Israel. But in Gaza, for 17 years prior to the event of October last year, there have been crimes against humanity committed against the civilian population, and that also came with obligations for the international society. And I'm just wondering, Terje, if you could, how do you think, as a professor of international law, in terms of how do we get to respond quickly to Russia invading Ukraine, and on the other side, how do we have the time to wait for a genocide before we react?
I think there are many comments that could be made to this question. One being actually that the West was not that quick to respond to the invasion of Ukraine in 2014. I mean, that there were some limited sanctions, but it was very quiet and otherwise, and I mean, it was basically business as usual in the relationship with Russia until the full-scale invasion, 24th of February 2022. But then there was a rapid reaction. That's true. Regarding Palestine, yes, I mean, it's a different political, geopolitical situation, of course, with the most Western countries supporting Israel for a number of years, basically. So that makes it difficult. You had in 2008, 2009, the attack on Gaza, and you had the Goldstone report led by a judge from South Africa, who had also been a judge at international tribunals. He was a well-respected Jewish lawyer and former judge in South Africa. And that report it concluded with war crimes and also crimes against humanity that had been committed. The report was heavily criticized, and Mr. Goldstone was also exposed to heavy criticism from many different circles. And it didn't lead to anything. I mean, it was a commission of inquiry set up by the UN, but such a commission can investigate, finding the facts, making a legal assessment, and then providing advice to General Assembly, Security Council, to other states what should be done. But nothing was actually done. And then in 2014, there was another attack on Gaza and another commission of inquiry, this time led by another well-respected international lawyer, William Shabazz, also concluding with war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I mean, it was much of the same that happened, which actually meant nothing happened. And then after the 7th of October, and even before that, there had been established a permanent commission of inquiry for Israel and Palestine, led by another famous international lawyer, Navi Pillay, again a South African lawyer who had been a judge at several international tribunals in Rwanda. She had also been an early judge at the ICC. And they made a report that was published now in I think it was in late May, for the period of 7th of October until 21st of December. So for that period in 2023, and they concluded that during the Hamas attack on 7th October, war crimes were committed, violations of human rights and humanitarian law as well, and then that Israel had committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, 5 different crimes against humanity. Actually, the same 5 war crimes against humanity that we, in our organization, ICDA Norway, had included in our complaint to the Norwegian prosecutors. We identified 3 of the most responsible Israeli leaders. Not Netanyahu, because it's not possible to prosecute a head of state in another national jurisdiction, not a state. But we included the Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, and 2 others, including the Chief of Staff. Yeah, and this UN Commission concluded that, in fact, the whole Israeli leadership is among all those persons are among the most responsible for those war crimes and crimes against humanity. Yeah, and then we know that what happened at the ICJ with South Africa making an application before the International Court of Justice against Israel that a genocide had been committed and was ongoing. So we had this case ongoing. It's ongoing, and they had made temporary decisions ordering Israel at 3 different occasions to stop acts that could be genocidal acts, which Israel, of course, has not respected. And then we had the process before the ICC, the International Criminal Court. And in fact, the International Criminal Court opened an investigation already in 2021. The state of Palestine became a member state of the Rome Statute to the ICC, for the ICC in 2015, I think it was. And it took like 6 years before an investigation was finally opened. And then we had the announcement in May by Prosecutor Khan that he had applied to the panel of judges, the panel with 3 judges, for arrest warrants of 3 Hamas leaders, 2 of which has been killed in the meantime by Israel. And then also Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant. And this process is ongoing. Usually it takes like 2 months before an application for arrest warrants is usually confirmed. I mean, can be confirmed with certain changes, can also be rejected, but that doesn't happen that often. But in this case, the UK intervened in the process and argued. They asked the court for permission to file a so-called amicus brief, written observations to the court as a third party, arguing that the Oslo Accords, Oslo-avtalene, prevented the ICC from having jurisdiction, power to prosecute any Israeli based on the Oslo Accords. And then the court granted permission to the UK to file its observations. Then there was a change of government in the UK. Yes. And the new government eventually withdrew its observations that they had asked permission to file. But in the meantime, the court had then granted permission also to others to file written observations. And you had to make a request for that. And there were some 70 requests from quite a number of states, many organizations, and also some individuals, usually professors of law, that were permitted to file written observations. And I think about 60 such briefs. They could only be 10 pages each, so there was a certain limitation, but it's still like 600 pages. And then the prosecutor got a quite a short time limit to file observations on all those 60 observations, which he has done, and arguing that there are no obstacles for filing the arrest granting the arrest warrants. And our organization also filed such a amicus brief with the same conclusion.
Thank you. I'll
So that's, I mean, it's an overview.
But I think it's an interesting contrast. The speed of the escalation of the deterioration of the human rights situation for Palestinians, and the time it takes for international law to govern the actions of states. But I think we'll come back to that. I think I'd like to ask Kyle and Kelly, what are for the people in NPA and maybe also partners in Gaza, what is their everyday like right now? I mean, you said something about the need to survive and, you know, make it from one day to the next. But I know that they have also permitted you, because I would like to contrast these processes with each other, because I think in many ways international law fails to protect individuals from the actions of states, and that's maybe why we're here, trying to find ways of finding ways out of that. But I would just like to contrast it with some of the stories that I know that some of your colleagues have asked you to convey from their everyday, if you feel ready to do that.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start, and Kyle and I can tag team on this, because I think it's important that he and I both speak on behalf of some of our colleagues, particularly those in Gaza. So we have 6 colleagues who remain in Gaza. Names unmentioned, locations not disclosed for obvious safety reasons. They are obviously going into an 11-month of a horror that they plead for international intervention and a cessation of violence, and every day, every week, every month have been waiting for traction by any state or any legal body or multilateral space to actually influence an end to what we are seeing in Gaza. And even though we have some level of fairly consistent connectivity and communications, we still get messages, even, I believe, yesterday, please, God, give us a ceasefire. This is an everyday, every night hope. We do a routine check-in with our colleagues actually across all of our areas of implementation and staffing in Palestine, including the West Bank. And so Kyle and I get every day, as well as possible, we get check-ins, communication. And I'd like to share some of the feedback that we get from some colleagues. We get cries for pleads for sending messages out And so we have permission to share some intimate details, I would say, in some regard. Night is the worst. So our evening check-ins usually come with responses of dread and hope that they will see tomorrow or the morning. With these evacuation orders, for those that are following closely, these consecutive evacuation orders are squeezing, and let's not be fooled, squeezing what is called humanitarian space, which is actually an untruth in terms of what the Israeli Defense Forces have said are safe humanitarian zones and where civilians find themselves. And these, within hours, sometimes minutes, become active conflict areas. So the space that our team members and our partners are afforded is not safe. To the point where our team members now have chosen not to observe evacuation orders, that they have said that they will stay in place and they will face what are the consequences of not fleeing and forced transfer to a place that would never ever provide them safety anyway. This to me is a really core message because they want the dignity that they've got wherever they've finally decided to stay and try and remain close with their families or a wider community and not run and flee in indignity. So now we have communication where we know we have colleagues and we have partners who are in these active conflict areas, day in and day out. I want to start with a positive message. We have one colleague who we are in touch with quite exceptionally, and I will write something like, stay safe tonight, knowing that night is difficult. And he said, of course, Kelly, I will, because I have a plan to rebuild Gaza. And I'm part of rebuilding Gaza. This is coming from somebody who's living, I think we've got a quote, up to 20 times displaced. I've lost count of the number of times this person has reached out to me saying, Kelly, I think tonight is my last night. But he's got a plan to rebuild Gaza. Yeah. The spirit and the will is amazing, and it's alive and well. But we have, on the other side, extreme trauma and despair, where we have colleagues that want this to end, but not end in a ceasefire. An end meaning bomb us now and get this over with. So this is the spectrum of communication and messages we get from our colleagues who are going into an 11th month without electricity, without toiletries and proper hygiene, without the ability to change clothes, let alone into something clean, guarding a tube of toothpaste that's been found and paid for, guarding a tube of toothpaste from the infestation of rats who eat tubes of toothpaste is what some of our team members are facing day in and day out. This is the reality, contrasted to the good professor's description of what are the larger institutional legal frameworks and norms that have pointed out time and time again the violations, the legitimacy of legal documentation and evidence and review of a violation towards a society or a group of people with intent. With intent. I'll stop there. I'm going to turn to Kyle and just see if he'd like to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think the question is great because something that Kelly and I and all of our different meetings and engagements that we've been having, we've gotten to the point now, and we have been for a while, that our biggest message is that it's not about numbers. Like, we can all read about what's happening and the huge numbers, but I think a really important thing to remember, especially as we come up to a year of this conflict, feels too small of a word, obviously, but it's the everyday things that people themselves are feeling, and I think it's important to be able to think and reflect on those stories, because these people are people who have families, who are in love, who are tired, who have all of these things, who have dreams, and it's this level of detail that sometimes goes unnoticed, and I think definitely, I mean, also to say, because Kelly's already kind of alluded to it, is that clearly we aren't here to talk as Palestinians, because as two North Americans, we will never be able to be close to doing that, but through our communication with our colleagues and with partners, we're able to try and at least give a bit of a voice to what they tell us. And I think in that close communication, I mean, Kelly's already shared some of the stories, but to the point that I was just saying, I mean, one thing that really impacted me this one time was talking with a colleague who said, "Oh no, I didn't really sleep well last night," and I was asking why, and he said, "Well, because I had a dream that the Israelis were dropping bombs into the sea, and that was creating a tsunami, and it came and killed all of us in our tents because we're only living in tents." And it's this type of detail of personal trauma that it's easy to forget that we all have nightmares, but the fact that he's having these types of nightmares when he's trying to sleep and get rest is something that really impacts, I think on a personal level, both of us on a personal level, and even yesterday talking with a colleague who said that, I was texting with him, and he's saying that, it's been very calm the past couple days because there's been this vaccination program to combat polio, and saying it's been great, it's been very quiet, less drones in the sky, less bombings, but I'm suffering because it's quiet, so I now have time to self-reflect and realize what's happening, and when you're not trying to just purely survive, he's having time to think about what's going on around him. And I think it's important not to lose focus on the fact that every one of these individuals is an individual, and that this is something that's going to be something that we have to contend with and work with whenever a ceasefire happens, hopefully soon.
Yeah. Thank you. Terje would like to...
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's in a way absurd that you have, on the one hand, what's happening on the ground, all the violations, all the suffering, and then you have these kind of distant legal processes going on, and what's really the impact of those, and what's the relationship? How can this change anything? But on the other hand, it's also about the concepts we use, and there's a struggle. I mean, it has always been a struggle how to define the so-called conflict between Palestine and Israel, because there has been a lot of propaganda. We've all been exposed to it. At least in my generation, from we were small kids actually in school when we learned about Israel in the first classes, and for a number of years in the main press. I mean, if you compare it with real international law, much of what was communicated was always kind of alternative facts. It wasn't the truth about the law. And so maybe I should mention this other case, which is also very important, the case before the ICJ with the advisory opinion coming this summer on the legal consequences of the occupation. How this case actually start, because it started long before the 7th of October last year. It started late 2022, and it was initiated to a large extent, I think, through a cooperation of Palestinian human rights organizations like Al-Haq.
Yes.
And one of those were in Oslo in the spring of 2022, together with the UN Special Rapporteur, Michael Link.
Yes. I was there.
Yeah, and it was discussed, what about the occupation? Yes, everybody agrees it's an occupation, except maybe for some extreme Israelis and other groups who did not even accept that there was an occupation. But apart from that, everybody agreed that there was an occupation. But what had not been settled or agreed upon was whether this occupation was legal or not. Strangely. Yeah. and then we discussed this in Oslo. I mean, there is a need for having this authoritatively settled, because it has never been. And then eventually it led to the General Assembly requesting the ICJ for an advisory opinion to rule on the legal consequences of the occupation. And then came this advisory opinion now in the summer, stating clearly that the Palestinian territories of Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank is one common territory, and it's all illegally occupied, and it has been for some time. What the ICJ didn't rule on is when exactly did the illegal occupation start, because they had not been asked about that. So they had been asked, is it illegal today? And I mean, that's usually how law works. You're interested in the legal situation today, not the legal history. So it's quite understandable that the questions were framed that way. But it also meant that the court didn't have to decide on that question. Because under international law, an occupation is usually illegal. It is illegal unless it has a legal basis. And that could be self-defense, for instance. In some cases, an occupation would be legal. For instance, in Germany, the Allied occupation of Germany after the Second World War was legal. It was a conclusion of the war, and it was at the end of self-defense against the Germans.
But it wouldn't be legal indefinitely, like this one.
Exactly. So that was argued before the court that anyway, this occupation would be illegal today, because it had lasted such a long time, since 1967. And it, of course, also included the violation of the self-determination of the Palestinian people. So the International Court of Justice based its view on this, that it had lasted so long, and also that Israel had violated a number of fundamental international legal norms, like the right to self-determination, and also the illegal settlements, the illegal exploitation of natural resources in Palestine, and the illegal treatment of prisoners, a number of such violations. And on this basis, they concluded that in any case, this occupation is illegal today. And they also said it was illegal before the 7th of October. And that also Gaza was illegally occupied before the 7th of October. And the consequences of that is that when you are illegally occupied, the people has the right to resist with arms. And you have the right to attack the occupying power, like we did in Norway during the Second World War. And we sent pilots bombing Germany during the war, which was considered legal. So there are certain consequences. And the court also said that the whole presence of Israel in the occupied territories are unlawful and should end as rapidly as possible, as they said.
Exactly.
And that means we are talking about a ceasefire, but that should not really be what we're talking about. I mean, it's not that there is a need legally for an agreement between the parties, because Israel is being illegally in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem. So from the perspective of international law, the situation is clear. There's no need for a ceasefire. It's only a need for Israel to withdraw its forces.
Exactly.
And this is what all governments should state clearly, but it's not.
And that brings me to my next sort of theme, because I don't know if everyone knows the Norwegian People's Aid history, but the Norwegian People's Aid was born in the struggle against Spanish fascism by Norwegian trade unionists who resisted fascism by going down to the Spanish front, building hospitals, building orphan homes, and so on. And so your institution that you, Kelly and Kyle, represent was born out of a popular struggle against fascism. And so now we've talked about, people on the ground in Gaza and the legalities and the processes that are happening now, and what the states, which makes states obligated to do something about their relationship to Israel. But I want to ask you all about the popular mobilization, because I think all these demonstrations for Palestine, all the activists that have taken to the streets, it has really, we have so many activities concerning Palestine right now, and we have demands against our government and so on and so forth, and I think it has an impact. And I think maybe you could say something about what the importance and the impact of keeping up that organized solidarity work and having this, keep strengthening the struggle that is informed by international law and the principles of international law. What does that look like for your partners? Does it matter that people take to the streets, that they organize in this struggle to support Palestinians, or the Palestinian right to self-determination, which is really the main point of their struggle?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've got a couple of ways I'd like to address this question. Is that one, Kyle and I sit in a country that we actually never set out to work in, and that's Jordan. And I think it's important to acknowledge that we have been warmly taken in by the Kingdom of Jordan, and that they are a country unto itself that has a population of Palestinian heritage, lineage, culture, and are in different ways in solidarity with Palestine. And that's really how I think we are warmly welcomed and have a place in which to almost seek refuge ourselves. I think the other thing I'd like to say about this question is that we've witnessed protests of solidarity in Jordan, which is an expression of the right to assemble, the right to express opinion, the right to stand up and speak out for the rights of Palestinians to be self-determinating in what they see for their future and for themselves as a community. And I think what's interesting, I'm Canadian, and my country has and I'm saying this publicly, grossly failed the Palestinians in regards to what my government has not done. I think my opinion of Norway in recognizing Palestine as a state, in having an organization like NPA that has a base of solidarity and identity that stands behind Palestinians and the rights for determination, and all the other rights that we see them being deprived of, is an amazing thing. And I was actually in the West Bank when Norway publicly announced its recognition for the state of Palestine. And we constantly share with our team members, including those in Gaza, photos of protests and solidarity events that happen around Norway and even around the world. And this is hugely motivating for our staff and for our partners. We have a plaque or a gift that was given to us that commemorates the date and the recognition by Norway for the state of Palestine. This was given to us by Palestinians. So these things matter, and these things are motivating to people who, for example, in Gaza, have no border that they can cross in which to secure safety. They have no right to leave the Gaza Strip and exercise that. But they know that there are people across Norway, and there's been public thanks to the student movements in the United States, which for many of us watched the exceptionality of that, as well as across the Arab world. So it matters, it's well received, and it's celebrated by staff and by partners that we are in touch with on a daily basis. And everybody in this room and everybody who's not in this room need to know that there's nothing here that's done in vain, or it sometimes I'm sure feels like it's not enough, but it's something. It's absolutely something.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I think you made a very good point kind of related to this, is that, and for those who I'm sure many of you know, but for those who don't know, NPA largely works through partners, is what we call them. They're local civil society organizations that are already mobilized to work on different things within their communities. Mm-hmm. And so we've been working with these partners before October 7th. They're already mobilized, they're already doing their work across both Gaza and the West Bank. And we worked with these partners before, and they've now turned to do a lot of humanitarian response to meet the needs that have emerged. But their message, and I think the message of all Palestinians, even if they can't leave Gaza, is that we're not going anywhere. Like, Palestinians are not leaving. These organizations are not leaving. The reason that they were formed in the first place and why we work with them is because their ultimate goal is for their own rights and for the right to self-determination for the state of Palestine. And so I think it's really important that, you know, we recognize that, and we all publicly recognize that it's important because it's important for them and because they're going to continue doing this work. So as you said, you know, we all want a ceasefire because that's the emergent, or the most emergency need, or the thing that we want to call for. But that has to, at the end of the day, lead to the self-determination for Palestinians. And so that has to be the kind of goal at the end of the day. And I think something that we spoke on yesterday in one of our meetings was also that, you know, our everyday actions might not feel like a lot. It might not lead to the ICJ making a decision that we want them to make, or I'm American, it's not going to make necessarily my government do what I very much would like it to do. But we all have an obligation as human beings to do something with this, because this isn't just about Palestine. This has now gotten to the point that we have to do something, because the institutions that we put our trust in, that if we're displaced, if we're in need, that they're the ones that will protect us. But currently that's not happening in Palestine. So it's now gotten to the point, almost an existential point, that this has to be about all of us as humanity, and what do we believe matters in humanity, and what rules actually should govern us as humanity.
Very nice, thanks. I have a question for you, Terje. Is it possible to see the creation of a Palestinian state without the Palestinian right to self-determination being upheld?
No, that's not possible. I mean, the right to self-determination was written into the UN Charter. It may have come as a surprise, actually, that that was possible,
Yes.
because you know, many states were colonial powers, and to insert this provision. But at that point, I think the Americans actually did a great job to put it in there, and it was used during the colonial struggles of many countries. It was picked up on by the General Assembly and other UN institutions, and I mean it's indispensable for a state and a people. I mean, you can have several peoples within a state, as we know. We have the Sami people recognized as Aboriginal people in Norway. In other states, there can be several peoples, and the right to self-determination doesn't mean that each people has a right to a separate state. But if there is a people, and if you have had been living on the territory, you have the right to a state if the people wants it that way. So the Norwegian people, we have the right to a state. The Ukrainian people has a right to a state which is not being attacked by other states. So it's crucial. I mean, it's crucial, and you have this in the UN Charter. You have the provision on the illegality of the use of force, the territorial integrity and sovereignty of a state should be respected. So the illegal use of force this is a key provision in the UN Charter. But this provision also makes a reference to the fundamental principles of the UN Charter, and the right to self-determination is stated as a fundamental principle in the Charter, and it's also stated in both the two main human rights instruments, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Cultural and Social Rights. In Article 1 in each of these main human rights instruments is about the right to self-determination.
I have a follow-up question, because when I think that there have been demands from the left-side parties and from NPA and from several parts of civil Norwegian society to recognize Palestine as a state. However, when our foreign minister and prime minister announced that they had, in fact, recognized Palestine as a state, they mentioned two things: the Arab Peace Plan, which is a Saudi Arabian initiative. The Palestinians are not part of that. And I actually don't remember the other thing I was going to say, but my point is that when you have a people like the Palestinians who are separated in terms of a refugee, the diaspora who are not allowed to return, you have people isolated in Gaza, you have people who are fairly isolated in East Jerusalem because they don't have the freedom of movement inside the West Bank, and then you have the West Bank. In terms of a process where the Palestinian people, have the ability to sit down and discuss their future properly with all civil society and the different parties across conflicts of interests and what have you not, can you have a proper state that lives up to the principle of self-determination if you don't have that sort of process before with the colonized people who have been separated? I mean, so my question is, have we not maybe jumped ahead a bit with the Palestinian state if we don't actually demand the occupation to end, the blockade to end, apartheid to be dismantled, and sort of, because I'm looking for what role can we who actually would like to go out into the streets and demand justice and demand democracy and demand proper processes for the Palestinians who should be outlining their future.
I think it's an important question, and we need to recognize that the Palestinian people are partly living in their own occupied state, and then there are other Palestinians living outside that state. So what's it with the right to self-determination? Yes, it means that the people must get the opportunity to constitute itself. To get together, to negotiate, to have proper processes, fair processes, leading to elections eventually. But what it does not mean is that other third states, like the United States, like the Western states, should sit on their back and decide who should be in, who should not be in, like deciding that everybody affiliated to Hamas cannot be part of the process. Well, no, that's against the whole rule of self-determination. It has to be decided by the Palestinians. Well, if people have committed crimes, they should be prosecuted in Palestine when it's possible, or by the International Criminal Court. I mean, that's the way to do it. Not to send a plane or a drone or whatever to kill the negotiators or the head of the different organizations. So it's very much against this idea to label a whole organization like Hamas to be a terrorist organization, because it prevents the people coming together and deciding themselves. So I think this is very important, but this is not what the Western states want. They want to interfere, they want to steer the process and decide who's in, who's out, and then actually splitting the people and making it very hard for any real progress to be made.
Thank you. Kelly, you would like to
I
comment?
just want to add to this because I think that what you've just said is so critically important. And what this term, you know, the day after term that we've heard over and over again, more or less driven by third party or Western states that want to control exactly how what you've just said, is the day after where with our colleagues and our partners is actually a very different concept. And I feel like I need to complement what you said with what we're hearing from on the ground, is that the day after is actually when the Palestinians that at least we know and talk to will truly understand the depth of the impact of this conflict on them as people and as a community, and to heal or even start to heal if that's possible, in order to be in a place where they could be a part of being involved in visioning or dialoguing what the future is for them. It's been phrased to us as the day after is actually when the hardest work will have to start. And it's not just political or legal, it's about the social, cultural healing that this conflict, if we call it that, has had. And is it going to allow Palestinians as people to trust and interact with groups or representatives that there is broken trust, to actually be a part of a self-determination process unto itself for Palestinians. And I think that's a really important piece for us to understand and to remember, that these processes should be about people, but we have a lot of hurt and a lot of people that need deep healing and deep support in order to get to a place where they can be fully invited into a process or be a part of a political process where there's full and diverse participation.
I would like to ask you all, how in a given day after situation, what role do you envision for Palestinian civil society? These are your partner organizations and similar organizations. Or maybe let me rephrase that. What do you think that the Norwegian people could demand of their politicians or their state in terms of supporting Palestinian civil society, who are, as we all know, doing their very best to compensate for not having a functional state, trying to provide healthcare, food production, and defend human rights in many ingenious ways, really.
Yeah.
I think the thing that needs to be demanded of Norwegian government and all governments is to ensure that there is a space, that there is protected space for civil society to operate, to have freedom of association and assembly. Because before the 7th of October, there was already a shrinking of civil society spaces, kind of the phrase that we use, with, for example, there being 7 terrorist or 7 organizations within civil society that the Israeli government labeled as terrorist organizations and physically raided their offices and forced them to be closed down off of charges that were not supported with evidence. And so it's important to make sure that local civil society is enabled by international governments, for example, their role, making sure that it has the space to operate, to give voice to the people that civil society represents, because the point or the purpose of civil society is to represent the diversity of society, to make sure that anyone can gather and can create an organization and put their voices together to inform the social, political space around them. And so it's important that that space is defended, I think.
Yeah. Excellent. I'm going to open for questions in a minute. I would just like to finish the session with telling a story I just told Kelly and Kyle before we came here, because I went to the West Bank in June, and and I'm a part of the Palestine shop, Handala. And when October happened, we asked for people who would like to participate to start knitting. And we now have around 80 knitters in the shop. One of them sitting there, my old colleague from Child Protection Services. And so before I went to the West Bank, Sigrun, who's not here now, but she's in charge of all the knitters, she said, "Do you have space in your suitcase? Please, we'd like to give you something." And she gave me this big bag of tiny little socks and hats and baby blankets for premature babies that these ladies had been thinking about whilst knitting. And I went to see the 7th terror-designated organization, Health Work Committees. And they no longer have an office. Their office was shut down. What they do is they do health work. They've been doing health work since the mid-80s all over the West Bank and in Gaza. They do health work for poor communities. They do a number of things. Their director went to jail for 1 year in an Israeli military prison for doing health work. And she was released after a year on the premise that she had to promised never to do any health work ever again. As a doctor and a feminist. And so we went, they no longer have an office. We went to a secret location in Ramallah, and we went 4 floors underneath ground level, and we're in this place where they used to keep medical supplies like wheelchairs and things, and said, this is where we can have our meetings now. And they were wondering a bit what this Norwegian delegation were doing, contacting them, and I said, listen, we've got a shop, we've got all these knitters, and they've been really worrying about the premature babies and the mothers in Gaza, and so I have a gift for you. And I brought up this huge bag of socks, hats, and baby blankets, and we became great friends. and they said, what they said was that, oh, we're aware how knitting has been a part of Norwegian resistance, and they knew about the red hats during the war, and really appreciated this gesture. And I think these socks and hats are now on their way to a hospital in Gaza. And so I think just to make a point that even if we don't get the states to move fast, and we don't get international law to move fast, we can do solidarity work, and we can organize, and we can do work informed by the principles of international law and still make a difference. Yes. Absolutely. And are there any questions? If anyone wants to ask their question in Norwegian, I can translate if you don't want to ask in English.
Well, thank you very much. That was very interesting. My name is Astrid Sulke. Since NPA is both a humanitarian and a solidarity organization, I was wondering to what extent your people on the ground can systematically collect information relating to evidence of war crimes, and if you've been in touch with the ICC office in that respect, and if you are working with the ICC to provide them with information.
How about I will take this question? Okay, and I've got a legal professor sitting beside me, so I feel comforted by this. NPA does not have a mandate in which to collect evidence on the ground in the cases of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and collecting evidence that would be fed into a review or a case under the Genocide Convention. These are dangerous activities for any civilian or any member of a civil society or INGO under conflict or fragile post-conflict situations. The collection of evidence needs to be done in a systematic way in which to retain its value, legal and otherwise, under technical supervision, etc. So I refer to this as contaminated evidence if this is not actually done properly. And from a conflict sensitivity point of view, more harm can be done than good if it's not actually technically correct. And I know this, why I say this, and Professor, please join in, is that I was working on Myanmar, Burma prior to going to Palestine, and I was involved with, or sort of a second-tier support to the ICJ collecting of, or at least identifying expert witnesses for the ICJ case that was activated against Myanmar. And so there's a lot of sensitivity.
You mean ICC or ICJ?
ICJ.
ICJ,
Yes.
the Gambia,
Yes,
Myanmar
the
case.
Gambia case,
which many legal scholars and analysts feel that the Gambia case on Myanmar was a bit of a forerunner that opened up some of the opportunities for the South African case at the ICJ. So it's a great question. I think there's a lot of legal technicalities as well as moral and ethical aspects to this, including the protection of For example, let's say MPA staff on the ground who could come across these sorts of opportunities or needs. I will turn to the legal expert here for anything further.
No, but it's true that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which is the court that do the criminal cases, ICJ do the kind of civil cases, cases between states and also advisory opinions, but they do not do the case as a criminal case. The South African versus Israel case before the ICJ is technically about state responsibility for the crime of genocide. It's not about individual responsibility for any particular person. Those cases are before the ICC, and the prosecutor has always been concerned with the problem of contaminated evidence, that witnesses had been interviewed by others, and maybe the witnesses had talked with several organizations, and then maybe when the witness finally appear before the ICC, the defense will submit that these witnesses, this information, where is it coming from? Is it coming from the interviews? It has been influenced by the questions they have got from different organizations, and maybe they have answered the questions differently. So, it's can be a problem for a proper international process. So this is something that the international community is aware of,
Right.
and more today than before.
Do you mind if I just chase this with one just other comment? NPA, we're an operational organization in Palestine. We want to be in Palestine. Palestinians don't control the borders of Palestine. So we have to balance our programming, our advocacy, our communication to a degree that allows us to maintain some level of amicable relations and access. And I just want to state that here because we walk a very fine line in this regard. We understand the goalposts can move on this, which they have done recently with the response of the State of Israel towards the Norwegian Representative Office in East Jerusalem. And so we are constantly assessing the best way and the best footing for us as MPA to be able to be in or have access to Palestine, to be with our partners and with our staff.
Just adding one point.
You can have 1 point, but then I'm going to have 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that regarding the crime of genocide and crimes against humanity, in the specific case of Gaza, the crimes, the acts can be seen as committed against the whole civilian population. And with regard to genocide, the Palestinian as a group. And that means that the evidence situation is quite different as compared to whether a specific war crimes at a specific place has happened, because that's a quite different evidentiary situation.
Yeah, so the evidence will be framed differently for the ICJ case and for the ICC who prosecute.
Yeah, and also maybe different for the crimes against humanity before the ICC as compared to some of the war crimes.
Okay, thank you.
And actually, it can be easier to prove crimes against humanity in the situation of Gaza.
Yes. Should we have a few questions and we'll collect more than one? We have 2? Yeah.
My name is Sten Simonsen, and I have a question. The title for this meeting is Palestine, now what? And I would like to know your suggestions of now what. Now there's been a war or a killing for nearly a year, and 40,000 people, many of them very innocent, are killed. And it's going on, going on, going on. And it doesn't help just to appeal to the Israeli government and the soldiers to stop. They just go on. So what can we do? We are in Norway now, but how do we stop the killings? That's, I think that's, for me, very important.
Well, would you like to? Would anyone like to try and answer that, or shall we take another second question first? Yes, yeah. There's another question here.
Hi, I work for the Palestine Committee in Bergen, and we focus on work with BDS, boycott, de-investments and sanctioning. And you talk about, Terje, you talked about international law. And our national laws are also supposed to adhere to international law. And we're working with, for example, the municipality of Bergen, boycotting Palestine. They have ruled twice, boycott Israel, sorry. sorry, I'm not in the wrong place. And they twice decided not to. And we have also correspondence with them because they have used millions of Norwegian kroners on computer equipment from Hewlett and Packard, which is very high up on the BDS list. We've tried to talk to them about åpenhetsloven. We've tried to talk about offentlighetsloven, but all they give us is deflecting nice words. It's very, very, very difficult to like get them to, yeah. And so I was wondering, do you have any advice on how to do that? Because it's a very, most activists work locally and from below and up. So it's natural for us to start with our municipality. But, and one thing that has been said regarding the decision to boycott Israel or not is that the advice or from the government, they have said that they advise companies not to trade with Israel companies who work on occupied land. And then the municipality of Bergen says that, well, it doesn't really adhere to public organizations. So it's always deflecting, and it's like so difficult to make them adhere to the laws we actually have locally as well. So I was wondering if you have any viewpoints or advice to us.
Can I add something?
Yes, we'll have a third one.
Subject. It's just I heard or read that when the ICJ ruled that it was a plausible genocide, that would trigger some responsibility for states and corporations, I'm not sure, to do something to avoid this plausible genocide. And can we connect that to boycott or pressurize the municipal or corporations to follow up on that?
Yeah, try to understand.
I'll try and answer that too, but I'll give Terje a go first.
Yeah, I think in a way these questions are connected to your much larger question. So part of the answer is, well, we have to do what we can at different levels, and then I mean, we know that the main hurdle for a real effective peace process and a real functioning Palestinian state is the United States, and that the politicians in the United States are actually bought, they are sponsored, and they are bought by sponsors, and this is the main obstacle. And I mean, it's very difficult to do something with that in the short term. In the meantime, we have to do what we can. I mean, be in organizations, working as we can do best at different levels with different issues. And this brings me back to your questions. And first, what's the relationship between a boycott and just doing what we are obliged to under international law? I think that's also important to make that in a way distinction, that the least we should do is what we are obliged to, and then we can discuss to have a voluntary boycott for ethical reasons, for political reasons, for humanitarian reasons. But that's the least we should do. And regarding the questions you had, I think it's very important to work on these issues. On Saturday, there was a time limit for making written observations to the ministry regarding the procurement laws, offentlighetsloven, lov om offentlige anskaffelser. Næringsdepartementet and fishery, commercial and fishery department. Not properly. Okay. Probably not the correct name in English. But this is the ministry that administers lov om offentlige anskaffelser, the procurement statutes.
I'm not going to allow back and forth because there are two more questions.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, but we can talk maybe after.
Yeah, ICJ Norway submitted a hearing note to the department, and what we focused on is especially the relationship between the statute and international law, because it's absolutely true what you're telling. It's also our impression, my personal impression from discussing with public procurement officers at different places, that they do not take international law into account, and it's very difficult to move them. So this can most effectively be done either through this legislative process that's now ongoing, or that some of the other ministries, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, intervenes in this process. And I think they are interested in actually doing something more.
I think you could make it illegal. I mean, I think you could make it costly to trade with or invest in companies who systematically are in breach of international law and human rights. And you could just make public procurers, investors, I mean the financial institutions, you make them follow the United Nations guiding principles for business and human rights, and if they don't, we can fine them. That's my personal
also true
opinion on the thing.
She's telling that it's actually been a situation that when state organs are doing their commercial acts,
yes,
they have had a lower threshold than what the state is imposing on businesses according to åpenhetsloven. So, I mean, it's very strange. It should be the other way around. I think at least they should be at the same level. I mean, there are many details we cannot go into.
I'm going to stop you now, but Terje, I would just like to say that some municipalities have local resolutions pertaining to this. But we have 2 more questions, and we're actually over.
Can we just make a? Can we just
Sure.
maybe address the
address
what,
the how do we stop the
what
killing
next?
question?
Yeah.
Yes.
And can I just make a suggestion of editing your question a little bit?
Yes.
So maybe with the question to maybe we can answer is what now? Right now. And I'll pass it over to Kyle to make some comments, but I just would like to say 2 things, is that we work every day in delivering some kind of response to the situation on the ground through amazing, capacitated, good-willed organizations and people. What now, to feed into what next, is seek out opportunities to continue to support work like that. That would be one of my suggestions. You're addressing a discussion here around national responses or holding accountability to different levels of government. Our equivalent of this would be to maintain space and support to locally led response, which is a Palestinian to Palestinian response, which is definitely what Kyle and I stand behind and what we as MPA in Palestine are supporting and doing. And maintaining that environment and that participation and the resources and capacity to have that continue through all of the phases of what is now, but what is to come. I think that would be also something that I would suggest. And to keep up your movements, your holding people and states and governments accountable, holding your MPs accountable, and continuing to take to the streets and not get fatigued, because actually hope matters. It's a full-time job, and it makes demands on us in a different way. It is important work, and it's demanding work, and my suggestion is to not stop doing that.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll be really quick because we want to hear your questions as well. And you've already kind of touched on some of it already. Kelly and Kyle in sync as always.
We're a show, we're a team.
And I think what now is important to say, because we're also only who we are right now. Like, some of us are knitters, some of us are activists, some of us are lawyers, some of us work for NPA Palestine. We all have our role and our voice and what we're able to do right now. So it's important to do whatever you can do, and that's not a cheap answer or something small, because again, we have colleagues and partners and people we meet in the streets of Ramallah and all of this, who by the smallest sign of solidarity and the fact that people are thinking about them in Norway means a lot to them. So I think everyone has their role and everyone can do something based on who they are.
Yeah. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you so much, all of you, for all the information that we have listened to today. I'm from Gaza myself, and I have contact with my family and my friends in Gaza, and they confirm everything that you're saying. A cousin of mine, she says it's even the right to grieve, the right to process the death of loved ones, they're denied that. And she's afraid of when all this stops, because then it will be a shock of realizing that all this has actually happened. So you mentioned tsunami, it was a nightmare. I think the tsunami is coming, and it will be in the form of need for a whole society for help. So as a member of Norwegian People's Aid, I have a question. Are you thinking of this tsunami when it comes? What do we need to do to help? And I agree with you, we have different roles, and it's very important with all the roles to combine together to help. But I also agree with what you're saying, help right now on the ground people directly, because it's the people who are going through all this hell for all this time. That was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And yeah, thank you for for sharing that with us. And I think 100% agree. I mean, our own colleagues struggle almost to allow themselves to, like you said, to grieve and feel what they feel and apologize to us. Whenever we got a call from a colleague in Gaza who had just returned to his parents' house in Han Yunis and saw that had been destroyed, and he was tearing up on the call with us and was saying, "I'm so sorry for getting emotional." And it was, of course, I mean, we can't even conceive of what that means. So thank you for sharing and for saying that, and completely agreed. And we're, yeah, definitely trying to do everything we can to prepare for what is to come, with one of the most important things being the mental health and the trauma that Palestinians in Gaza as well as the West Bank have, because I think it's important that we also mention the West Bank and how it is today. We have colleagues as well as other people who themselves don't allow themselves to feel the trauma and the hurt that they feel, because they look to their brothers and sisters in Gaza and say, well, look what they're going through, so what I feel doesn't matter at all, even though clearly it does. In terms of kind of MPA Palestine's, what we're looking to do going forward and whenever this tsunami comes, I think is a lot to continue what it is that we're doing now. The needs in Gaza especially are unmet in every humanitarian sector, whether it's food, health, water, anything like this. And so in a way, we're trying to do everything that we can. I mean, some concrete examples maybe that we have based on our partners is, for example, food security. So we have farmers networks that we work with, farmers organizations who have networks across all 5 governorates in Gaza who, since the beginning of the war, these farmers have and continue today to produce food on whatever land it is that they have. And these organizations who support these farmers in their production then purchase this food and then redistribute it to communities. So that's been one of the types of humanitarian work that in the past 10, 11 months that we've been doing the most of, and we think is going to continue to be a need as aid still continues to be blocked entering into Gaza, and including food. And so that's been one thing we've been really focused on, and somewhat linked to that last comment as well, is that with some of the money that we've been able to get from very generous Norwegians, is that we've been trying to look at now trying to be able to send aid shipments from Amman to Gaza, which we successfully did in June. We were able to send food parcels as well as dignity kits to North Gaza to be distributed in communities, and that's something that we look to continue to try and do through this UN system that coordinates aid being sent from Amman to Gaza. So that's another maybe concrete thing to point to, but I'll turn it over to Kelly to add to anything else.
What I just say is thank you for saying what you said.
I'll have a last question before everyone up here starts crying.
Hello. Er det lyd her? Yeah. My name is Hanne Indrehus, and I have a very different question. I heard in the news today, I think it was, that England has stopped selling some weapon items to Israel because of they are afraid they are breaking the international law, which is fantastic, even though it's probably not so very big influence those 30 items have. But I have 2 questions. How do you consider this? Do you think that this could be a start of more countries starting to back off a little bit? That's the first. And the other is, how to say? Is it possible that after the judge has made a decision about what's going on in Palestine, that odd countries that have been supporting Israel could also be accused? How is that?
Very good question.
Yeah.
We'll turn to you, Terje.
I mean, in a way, it's a paradoxical situation that, on the one hand, we have never been so close before to having the law clarified, international clarified authoritatively by international institutions. And then on the other hand, we have never been so close for a total destruction of the Palestinian society. So I mean, this is it's a sad situation, and we don't know who will, I mean, finish the work, to use that word, first. Whether Palestinian society will completely destroyed before international law has finally clarified that this was genocide, this was illegal occupation, this was apartheid, this was criminal acts, the whole large part of the Israeli societies were criminals, that the United States leadership, that Biden, Harris, and Blinken are criminals. Of course, I mean, you can be complicit in these crimes. Other states' leaders can be complicit. And of course they are complicit. I mean, if this is a genocide, then the Biden administration is complicit in genocide, no doubt about it. The UK government is complicit in genocide.
The Germans.
The Germans, I mean, there is a case, Nicaragua against Germany, going on before the ICJ, but because it's linked to the other genocide case, the next submissions have been postponed until next year. And so this is more low-key, but it's coming in the wake of the other case regarding complicity. And with respect to what's happening in the UK, it's not that the UK government is doing this for fun or because they want to do it. It's because there is a case before the High Court. So this limited, like 10% cut of the licenses is coming 2 days before the case in the High Court. So it's a strategic measure also, in order to avoid a defeat in the court, because now they can point out that we are cutting the most
we're in compliance.
dangerous, and then the other things are in compliance. I mean, it's better for the lawyers the UK lawyers to argue that in court. So I think that's the reason, direct reason why it comes now. But it also means that law can matter, and the more clarity we get when the arrest warrants are out, when the genocide case proceeds, so on and so forth. But then again, will it come soon enough? And is it possible to move the United States, to move Israel? Because otherwise it will be just, okay, that this is the law, but we just break it. We don't care. And they are actually destroying international law. It means also that it will become difficult for Ukraine to resort to international law. Yes, it's an aggression, but so what? It's also an aggression against Palestine. I mean, illegal occupation is aggressive acts under the Rome Statute, and are, as the main rule, a crime of aggression. And I asked Aspen Barth Eide in Arendal. We had a debate there about international law, and I wanted him to confirm that what's going on in Ukraine is a crime of aggression, because that has never been said publicly by Norwegian politicians. They always refer to it as a breach on the UN Charter, and at the most, an act of aggression. An act of aggression, which is not the same as a crime of aggression. This is a fine legal distinction. And it's very important. And usually Norwegian politicians and also politicians in other states say, we cannot say that this is a crime because the court has not said it yet. But that does not never happen if there is a terrorist act committed, a clear terrorist act. Of course, they call it a terrorist act. I mean, whether it's in Norway or other places. But then Aspen adds, yes, it is a crime of aggression. I can say it. It is a crime of aggression. So that's fine. It's very good that he is saying that. So then the next question is, why is Norway not saying the same regarding the attack on Palestine? Yeah.
I think we're out of time. We've spent 15 more minutes than we were supposed to, so I'm going to land this official part of this meeting. I'm sure that there are people here who would like to talk together anyway afterwards. That's purely voluntary, of course. I'd like to thank you all for a really good discussion, and thank you for everyone who came and listened and had brilliant, excellent questions. And then you'll probably sum up as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Kelly, Kyle, thank you so much for coming and telling us the strong stories from the ground in Gaza and Palestine, what the people are thinking, what they are doing. And I'm especially glad to hear what our support is meaning for them, the solidarity, the international solidarity all over the world. So that's important for us. And Terje, thank you for enlightening us about all these difficult legal issues. And I think all the process started during this war will be very important for the end of this conflict and give the Palestinian a free country once. And maybe we should send a big thank you to some guys in South Africa as well. Yeah, they have been important in this issue. And Sara, thank you for leading the debate. And we have some gifts for you from the Palestina shop, who you have visiting earlier today. Sara and Terje, you are going to have some oil from Palestine, and we had some nets with the Handala figure outside, and a book about Bergen as well, because you're leaving tomorrow and you're not able to see very much of the city, and so you can read about it. And there will be some nice pictures on the plane. So thank you very much, and thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you.